Welcome back to Learn Your Stripes. I'm Ryan Guillory.
And I'm Michael Moran. And today we're going to continue our review of Rule 1 and discuss some of the markings that you see on the field and game balls as well. Now, we didn't have a play of the week last week, so this week we're going to get right into things. Ryan, what's on the docket today?
Yeah, as Michael said, we're continuing in Rule 1. I kind of feel that this might be a looked-over rule when people are reviewing the rule books. So I think it's important, especially when coaches and ADs have questions, for us to know Rule 1. What's the field supposed to look like? Last week we talked about player equipment, to make sure we're knowledgeable of that. So let's keep going along those lines. I'm not going to insult you by telling you that a football field is 100 yards in length, but as you know, it's 100 yards in length between the goal lines, 10 yards in the end zones, 53 1/3 yards wide, right? If you have a grass field, or I guess a turf field as well, there's the slope as well, and the rule book tells us what that is. As officials, we are not going out and measuring that. We're not going out and building or constructing fields. We're relying on the schools, the athletic departments, and whoever their construction company is to take care of that for us by the time we get there. Of course, the field of play is the area within the boundary lines and the goal lines. There's end lines, there's sidelines. They run parallel and or perpendicular depending on what we're thinking of. So there's High School Rule 1, Section 2, Article 1. Right, and as we often find, schools will have those orange triangular yard line markers with the soft pliable materials that shouldn't be any closer than 5 yards to the sideline. I know that Michael, you and I, when we go, one of the first things we do when we step out onto a field is we grab those and we put them back on the track. This is no closer than 5 yards to the sideline. With us, they're probably not within 10 to 15 yards of the sideline, depending on how far that track is from the sideline. So right. There's your basics in terms of what the field looks like, what the yard line markers are. Let's talk about a little bit more about lines and other markings, Michael.
So a lot of times if we're watching on TV, right, we see all the lines, we see the field markings, the logos, and it looks pretty, it looks, energetic, but each of those lines means something that Ryan kind of alluded to, and specifically talking about the yard lines. A lot of times if you're watching on TV, there's 1 yard line every yard and a big stripe every 5 yards. Ryan and I have been on some fields where we've had just the 5 yard lines, and the yard lines in between weren't so obvious. So one of the things we want to talk about today is not just the field, because like Ryan said, that would be rather boring, but kind of what we're doing when we prepare ourselves. So we all know that we've got a big stripe, that we call it a big yard line, 5, 10, 15, and so on. But in the case where you're at a grass field maybe, and maybe bad weather the night before, or it rained, or maybe they were run out of paint, you need to be aware of what you're getting yourself into and what you can plan on seeing before the game gets going. And I alluded to, we were at a field one time that the individual yard lines, I don't think they were even marked, Ryan, recall. I don't even know if we even had hashes.
Yeah, we've had a couple. The one that I think that we're thinking of, it did not have, individual yard lines. It was only big lines. Yeah. And there were very faint hashes. So our umpire, God bless him, did one heck of a job that night using the goalpost and everything else he could to try to simulate the 1 through 5 for placement on the field.
We did, and you know what? That's just it. You do the best you can, and you make sure. I think in that point, it's all about game management and keeping the pace of play going. I think the worst thing you want to do is try to be out there with an AD and say, hey, we need to go out to the hardware store and get some paint. That's not going to earn you a lot of points. Now, fortunately, a lot of schools are going to turf, which is really nice, and you're probably seeing more of the bigger logos across midfield. Some span, from 40-yard line to 40-yard line. And the rule book talks about, you got to still see the yard lines. I will also say, if you were out there with a coach or an AD talking about how the 50-yard line is not visible, that's probably not a good way to score a lot of points. And again, it's just going to make your night run a lot longer. So,
yeah, we've talked before about not being a pioneer. So if you want to be the official who cancels a game because the 50-yard line is covered up by the logo in the middle of the field, write to us at learnyourstripes@gmail.com to let us know how that goes for you.
And we talked about our hash marks too. One of the things that Ryan and I do, we have the pylons that we walk around and we make sure they're in the right position. A lot of folks may not know there's 2 pylons at the end of each field, and a lot of times you'll see them kind of by the uprights or just on the end line. We line those up too with the hash marks. And I think our estate manual might even talk about that. We covered that earlier in our earlier episodes. But we line those up because in the event you don't have a hash mark or they're just tough to see, maybe you got mud or snow or something, you still have that orange pylon across the way that you can kind of get a marker for. And what I'm talking about, hash marks, I'm not talking about the individual yard lines you see down the sidelines or down the middle of the field. These are run perpendicular to the big stripes. So now the other thing we'll talk about too is the numbers. A lot of people see numbers in the field, and they're not there just by accident. The rule book talks about having 9-yard marks, but in the place of that, you can substitute and have numbers. And if you want to score some points with your observer, if you're ever being observed, step off the 9-yard marks there, and you should have 9 yards to the top of those numbers, and it will score you a lot of points. I think that's one thing that Ryan and I both have to each of our pre-games there. As we're walking the field, we look around, we step all that off, we make sure that everything's 9 yards or 10 yards or wherever it's supposed to be.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point, Michael, because I can think of 2 seasons ago, we had a game where the numbers were painted 6 yards off of the sideline instead of 9 yards. Because normally you just use the top of the numbers. That's the 9-yard marks, right? And so that's why we tell wide receivers, make sure you get inside the numbers between every play. But on this one field, the numbers were off, so that wasn't a good guide for us. So we had to be mindful when we were trying to think of where's a 9-yard mark, that we had to sort of mentally add a couple of yards in from the top of those numbers, just to be in line with the rules here. And I think Michael's made a good point, and I think one of the things we want to stress is that we don't go over this particular rule and the particular measurements of the field because we're trying to be overly technical, right? I think that's one emphasis that we've had running from episode 1 through now, is that we're not trying to do this for the fun of it. We're not trying to be overly technical. We use the hash marks because the umpire has to place the ball within the hash marks, 1 through 5. In terms of those positions, you can use the goalpost as a marker. As Michael said, we have those extra pylons behind the goalpost that are on the hashes. We use those as guides. We use the top of the numbers, the 9-yard marks, as guides. All of this is to guide us for various things that we have to do when we're administering the game. So it's not that Michael and I are out there with measuring tape and running to an AD to say, your numbers are off, go get some paint and repaint it here. We don't do that. It's for our purposes in terms of being able to administer a game properly, because that's our role. We're administering the game. That's what we're there for. That's what we get paid for. Nobody's there to see us play or to throw a flag. We're there to administer a game and make it run smoothly, whether that's penalties, whether that's knowing where to place the ball, knowing where certain people need to be in relation to other markings on the field. That's our job. That's why Rule 1, it's boring. It doesn't talk about scoring. It doesn't talk about passing rules. You're not going to see anything about holding inside of it, but it's important to know. So, Michael's going over those as well. There's markings on the playing surface itself. There's markings outside. We've talked before about team boxes, coaches' boxes, and our position on the sideline. Team boxes are important to us because we want to be safe, right? Remember, that area of the white, that's our space. If you're an L or an H like me and Michael, that's your space. Nobody else is in there during the play. If they are, we're going to have a problem. We're going to have some issue there that we're going to have to deal with. So we need to know what the team boxes are supposed to look like, right? There has been some variance for COVID with the length of the boxes. Currently, it's back to the within 25-yard line. So there's 50 yards for the team box. There's the 6 feet that the officials have, followed by the coach's box. And then behind that, closer to the stands, that's where the players go. The coach's area, it's a minimum of 2 yards, just like ours, behind where we are. If you're at a field that might be a little different in dimensions, and I've seen this for the couple college games that get played at baseball stadiums, so it may be limited to that, but I suppose you could have it happen in high school as well. And that, I know there's been some games at Victory Field over the years, so I don't know if this was an issue there. But you can have both team boxes on the same sideline. So if you ever show up at a stadium, you see that is allowed, so don't freak out. But the boxes have to be between the 20 and 45-yard line. So instead of getting their normal 50 yards on the sideline, each team would have 25 yards. So it would be a big adjustment for them as well. So that's the team boxes. In terms of the end zones, obviously, when we're walking the field, we're trying to figure out where the end lines are. And every game that we have, unless it's super obvious, but especially with turf and the various colors for soccer and lacrosse and everything else that's out there, I know that Michael and I and our back judge, when we're walking the field, one of the first things we want to do when we hit an end zone is figure out what's in and what's out, right? So if there's the white outside line, then a yellow soccer line or something, is the yellow in or is it out? You can use your 10-yard, you can use the chains to measure from the goal line back to there and figure out what's out and what's in. So that's what we do on our crew to help us figure out where the end line starts. It might be useful for you to do as well. I'm sure we're not the only people that do that, but it's a useful way to figure that out.
Can I jump in, Ryan, real quick on the team boxes too? There are some fields that you might see, even if they're turf, where that white stripe we talk about all the time, the white out of bounds, may only be a yard. And so that's something to be aware of too. Again, you can step it off. You might hear Ryan and I say step off. As silly as it sounds, I try to take a step and measure out what a yard is, and shamedly, I guess I admit I've practiced it before just to get an idea of a sense of what a yard is. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it gives you an idea, a reasonable expectation. And you can step off very quickly. If the white looks thin, take a couple steps. It should be 2 steps, and if it's not, then you know that you need to be talking with your coach and talking with your team that, hey, it's not the white tonight. We need to stay back further. But Ryan's absolutely right. Take the time to look around, and we got to keep ourselves safe and keep the team safe as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think one of the things we've emphasized so far, and Michael just raised a really good point with it as well, is that the rule book tells us what pretty much the ideal is. If you turn on the TV, a lot of Big Ten schools and SEC schools, ACC, you pick any conference, any D1 level school, really. Well, I shouldn't say that. Basically all throughout, but colleges, a lot of them have turf programs and various other actual college programs where they're able to grow the grass each week, and they have people dedicated to measuring, getting out there and doing that. And the high schools, they work really hard. I mean, ADs and coaches, those are some hard working people, but they just don't have the same type of resources in terms of these programs and the number of bodies to throw out to get out there and to maintain the grass, to spray the lines every week if need be. So not every game you're going to go to, you're going to face the ideal, what Rule 1, Section 2 tells us the field is supposed to look like, right? So this is why Michael and I are emphasizing that you have to use some common sense. You have to know the rules so that you can figure out where things should be, but also use common sense, right? Because just because of the ground's not always going to be even. So there are times where you might be looking down the sideline and that line's a little bit crooked. So you have to figure out, if this runner's running in a straight line, but one step is in and the next one's out, whereas he's still going straight, how are you going to handle that? That's a tough call, right? If the line's very crooked and you know that his foot probably should be in, but he hits a line, are you calling him out? I am.
I would too. If he touches white, I'm going to call him out.
If he touches the white, I'm calling him out, right? But that's one of the things that you have to figure out, because if you're in that moment and you know that line is crooked and he otherwise would be in, what are you going to do, right? You don't have time to think through it. You're going to have to see it and react. And, Michael and I are calling him out. I would suggest you probably should too. But you have to be ready for that. This is all about preparation. So you get out there and things aren't ideal or things are in high pressure. You're not thinking, you're reacting, and you're doing your job. That's what we're pushing for there.
Yep.
Think through, high school fields, of course, the end zone can be decorated. We have to know where the actual end line, sideline, where those are. So any writing that's white or anything of the sort has to be a certain distance from those. Obviously you need your mark at the 3-yard line for extra point tries. That line is pretty standard. It should be 2 feet long by 4 inches wide. Again, that's what the rule says. It's not always going to be that. Sometimes it's going to be a little bit crooked. Sometimes it's not going to be 3 yards out. Sometimes it's going to be 2 yards. And so your umpire is going to have to figure out where the 3 yards is and either march it off every time or figure that out. So again, you're not going to shut down a game just because the field might be a little bit off on some measurements. Again, good luck to you if you're the pioneer in that area. But we're going to make it work when we get out there, and things might not be ideal for us. So that's a lot on markings and lines and such. And Michael's already hit this a little bit, but why don't we talk a little bit more about pylons and the actual goalpost itself?
Sure. So the pylons, the orange cones rather that you might see, again, they serve a purpose too. And definitely in pregame, Ryan and I are walking around, and we even double check each other. He starts on one half, and we walk around opposite sides, and then check each other on the other side. But I know as a wing, those pylons on the end there, they're the most important part, because that tells me who's in, who's out, and where it is. And so we want to make sure when we're walking the field that pylon should be placed, perfectly where it intersects the goal line and the end line, because it's going to make your night a lot easier, make your job a lot easier. And then even the back pylons too.
And if I can just jump in there, look, Michael and I have worked a lot of football. We're pretty good at what we do.
Okay.
Michael's very good at what he does. But
okay.
But even knowing these rules, there's times where I've just gone out and I can think of one game where I just had a brain fart, and I went out to the field and I put the pylon inside of where it should have been instead of touching the outside of the intersecting lines. And I remember Michael getting on the radio and asking me, like, what are you doing? And I just thought through it. So again, this is why we check ourselves, right? I would like to think that I can go out and set pylons on a football field. I know I had a game where I didn't do that, right, in pregame. So, this is why we check ourselves, because nobody's perfect. We all have those moments, and whether it was a senior moment for me or what, we got it fixed and we moved on. So, it's good to work together on these things just to make sure that you end up in the right spot. So,
yep. And it's all about, part of it is about safety, the other part is about game management. And I had somebody, I don't remember where I was moving the markers back, the yard line markers back to the track, and they looked at me and they said, why am I doing that? I said, it just gives me more room to work. And I insulted this person because they'd taken the time to go out and put them in that particular spot. That's a hard spot to be in, but we have to kind of put these markings and put these pylons where it's going to make our lives a lot easier. So
right.
Same with these goal line pylons. They've got to be in the right spot. And I think I take turf fields a lot for granted, especially, we're lucky enough here in central Indiana. We've got a lot of turf fields, even around a lot of the counties too. But don't change your habits because you're going from turf to grass or grass to turf. Always do everything the same way. A field is a field. And sometimes even on grass or turf, that pylon's going to be mashed down in a spot that it's been there for years and years. And you might have to work it a little bit if it's not in the right spot. Just again, it's to make your life easier.
Right.
And I think, the last year, the year before, we had a field that had a very, very steep slope, I think, in one of the back corners. I don't specifically remember where we were, but it's something you need to be aware of, because I think our end line was a little crooked, or I just remember it being a steep slope to the back there. And it can make for some challenging times if you're not prepared for it and you don't know what you're getting yourself into. So
absolutely, yeah.
We talked about the goal and the crossbar. We're 23 feet and 4 inches. We're not the pros, so hopefully nobody comes across. I think they're at 18 feet. So if you ever come out there, that might be worth contacting game management and seeing what's up, because that's going to change the game. But we're not measuring that. We're not measuring its 10 feet off the ground, all that good stuff. If you can dunk, great. I wouldn't do it out there on a Friday night though. So, but that's a good time to also look at the padding, making sure the padding on the upright is secure and not going to come off. And again, little things like that you're checking, just those markings around the end of the field. That's where player safety comes in hand. And again, it's important to make sure everybody can have the best night possible and stay safe.
Yeah, and you're likely going to have some fields at some point. And it's not based upon where you are. It's just because of weather, because of various other reasons. Sometimes those uprights, they're not really upright. They're leaning one way or the other. And that's just a challenge for the kicker. I mean, there's nothing we can do. We're not getting on the ladder and readjusting this or fixing it. No. That's beyond our qualifications. And quite frankly, I wouldn't have any idea what I was doing for that anyway, other than feebly pushing at it if I tried to do it. So, that is what it is. Again, it may not be ideal, but you're going to have goalposts. They might be a little bit lopsided. Sometimes those wind events that happen, not necessarily great for big pieces of metal that are sticking up in the air, and you just have to deal with it. Again, the whole thing here: be prepared and be flexible. That's how you deal with these things. We've talked about the field. We've talked about the goalpost. Let's talk a little bit about the ball itself. The ball itself, the book tells us, and I'll just read this just because I always enjoy the actual descriptions of this. It's a tan-colored cover consisting of either pebbled grain, cowhide, or approved composition, leather or rubber case, without corrugations other than those formed by the natural seam grooves and the lace on one of the grooves. Now,
it needs to look like a football.
It needs to look like a football. The umpire is going to test it, make sure that it's passable. It can't be sticky. You want it to not be peeling off the stripes or anything like that. You don't want those laces to be hanging there. So it's got to look like a football, and that's going to be about the extent of it, right?
What about the K-ball, Ryan? What about the K-ball on Friday nights?
The famous K-ball. So here's a test question that for you guys that will always come up. In the college rule book on the football, there's only a certain number of laces that are allowed. But in high school, you can have either 8 or 12 evenly spaced laces. And I think every year, the Part 2 NFHS test, there's always a question that's about the number of evenly spaced laces you can have. So for high school, remember, you can have either 8 or 12 evenly spaced laces. There's the continuous 1-inch stripe that we would have near the end of the ball. Again, thinking through high school versus college. High school, we've got the stripe that goes around the ball. We're looking for 12.5 to 13.5 psi. So your umpire is probably going to have either a gauge, a pump, or something out there to figure out if the ball is going to pass or not. And for any high school ball, whether it's 9th grade or above, there's an NFHS authenticating mark on it. And in addition to laces and the stripe, there are certain markings that are allowed on the ball. Michael's going to talk about those.
So this came out, I think this rule changed in high school a couple years back, but you can have the ball manufacturer's name on there, the school name, you can have a conference. Obviously, state finals comes around, we have IHSA markings on our balls. So, but the one thing I think that they're really looking for is you can't have like sponsored balls, right? You can't have like a John Deere or a Harley Davidson ball or something like that. That's what they're trying to avoid. If I saw that, I would look at either the coach or the ball personnel, whoever's had it, and say, yeah, we're not playing with that one tonight. It's that simple. A lot of schools some schools might have 4 balls, some schools might have 20 balls, and there's no Ryan. There's no limit they can check. So
correct. In high school, there is no limit, and I want to say we had a game last year where one school had, I cannot remember if it was 12 or 14 footballs, but our umpire dutifully checked in every single one of those balls that passed. So there is no limit in high school, and obviously weather might play into that. If it's a nice night, you usually get 3 or 4. If it's going to be rainy or snowy or something along those lines, that's when you get up closer to 8, 9, 10 balls.
Yeah, and we always discuss as a crew kind of the marking that we're looking for, and I think our umpire uses a pink marker or something. I would suggest using a relatively bright colored marker, pink, blue, purple, something. You could use black, it's just hard to tell. And one of my post resolutions, how about that, from last week's episode, is to be better at checking the ball marking. There's been a couple instances where I know I've grabbed the wrong ball and oops, it's the other team's ball, or you look at it and you say, oh crap, that one didn't get marked, and they had it for a play, and that's something you want to avoid. Alluding to what I mentioned earlier about that K-ball, a lot of teams try to sneak that smooth stone of K-ball in there in certain situations. So that's one thing you want to pregame as a crew, is how are you going to mark a ball and say, okay, I checked this one, we're good to go. And a lot of umpires have been doing this a while. They can just feel it. I know several umpires, they can pick the ball up and they know PSI is good, the quality is good, the texture is fine, and they're able to do that. So, Ryan, let's jump to our favorite part, chains, right?
Yeah. I'm going to get into chains. Obviously, that means a lot to us as wings. Before I get there, though, remember, we talked about checking in the balls before the game. Michael made a good point. I have to be more mindful as well, checking for that mark, because if our umpire is going to take the time to actually mark them, let's make sure we get them in, just so I make sure that they're not getting one in hasn't been checked in. So it's not. It may be a legal football by the measurements, but because it wasn't checked in, it's not a legal ball for that game. And as Michael alluded to, there used to be that a team could designate a kicking ball, and perhaps that's more just from watching college and NFL games where the K-ball is an actual thing that's separate from. I guess that's really just the NFL. College can have it, but it's not a designated separately like made and controlled ball like it is in the NFL.
I think the NFL, you get a whole ritual you get to do with your K-balls or something like that. So.
Now, a lot of high schools will have a ball that the kicker prefers that they will try to get in on kicks, and that's fine. It's just there's no kicking ball. We're not going to stop the game to run in a kicking ball for them. If we have a break, say before kickoff, and they can get their ball in, and it's a legally checked in ball, perfectly fine, play on. But if they're about to punt and the punter wants his special ball, and that game clock is or the play clock's at 20 seconds, I'm not stopping. Michael's not stopping that clock to run a new ball in, just for the punter's preference. So that's what we mean.
A play clock can be at 38 seconds. I'm not stopping it.
Yeah.
That ball's out there. We're playing with that ball.
Yeah, it doesn't matter where it is there, unless there's a timeout or something, or something like that. Or there's some weather condition, there's a timeout. Obviously, when we have rain, then we're getting footballs in and out a lot faster and a lot more often than we are if it's perfectly dry. So just something to be mindful of there. But I only note that because when we sort of joke about the K-ball, there are schools where the ball boy or the coach will come to me and ask to get the kicking ball in, and I will respond every single time, Coach, I didn't hear you say that. But if there's a different football and there's a legal time to get a ball in, we'll certainly get that one in. So I never hear anybody talk about a kicking ball. So as Michael said, we're going to talk about chains. And so we're going to spend about 45 minutes on chains because that's what this is going to be another difference between high school and college. High school allows you to either have what we think of as the traditional chains that have the two posts, usually with an orange or orange striped soft flexible material in front of the post. Those two rods will be 10 yards apart, and they'll have chains connecting them. Or the NFHS rules allow any other 10-yard indicator with a visible line to gain indicator to be used as the official line to gain equipment. Practically speaking, I've never seen a school do anything other than what we think of as the normal sticks with the 10-yard chain in between it. But the NFHS rule, and that's another part 2 question almost every year, you can either have the sticks with the chain or some other 10-yard indicator with a visible line to gain indicator there. But for all practical purposes, every school you're going to go to, you're going to have the traditional, the down box, and then the sticks with the chain in between it. So the line to gain indicator fixes the line to gain, and the down indicator is used to mark the spot of the ball and indicate the number of the down in a series. So when we talk about the down indicator, that's the box. So you've got somebody flipping through it, or if they've got one of those fancy digital ones, I don't really know how those work myself, but I know more schools are getting those. So you're going to have the box, and then you're going to have the two sticks with the chains, your 10-yard line to gain indicator there. The official line to gain and down indicators are always operated about 2 yards outside the sideline opposite the press box, except in those stadiums where the total play enclosure wouldn't permit that. I cannot think of a stadium that I've been to that has that problem.
Me either.
If there isn't a press box, and I cannot think of a stadium I've been to without at least some small press box, then the location is specified by game management at the request of the head linesman. So for all practical purposes, the chains are always going to be opposite the press box, and that in high school, that's going to be the head linesman side. So that's where Michael is. On our crew, Michael has the chains, and I don't. And that's just how we work. It works for us, and that's what we do. Those chains go up and down the field unless the line to gain indicator, unless we have a first down inside of the 10, then of course we put the chains down. Now, sorry, go ahead, Michael.
I was just saying, and make sure too. This is all part of our pregame, right?
Right.
Some schools have their chain crew out, 30 minutes out. Some schools have their chain crew getting in there at 10 minutes till kickoff, and that can be a little nerve wracking. But it's a good thing to talk about. With your chain crew, and I think we alluded to this in one of our earlier episodes of how you're going to communicate with them throughout the game, what they can expect from you, how they can help you out, how you're going to help them out, and when you get inside that first and goal, make sure they put the chains down and back and away.
Right.
I don't like them standing there. It can cause confusion with the chains up. Have them lay them down, back out of the way, near the track is fine. And make sure, again, you have yourself plenty of room and plenty of space to work.
Right. Yeah, a stadium can have chains on both sides. It's just that the official line to gain and down indicator is going to be on the side opposite the press box side, and then the ones that would be on the press box side would be unofficial. I cannot think of a high school I've been to that's had it. I did have a college game last year where on the press box side I had a down indicator on the press box sideline, and I know we're still in the high school section of the podcast, but just as an aside, when you have that on the press box side, it is so exceptionally nice. I didn't have to think through a whole lot. So as I'm getting my counts in between plays, I had a guy in my ear saying, you're looking for the 42 at second down, something like that every single time. And boy, that was nice. But again, I've never had that in high school. I think the state championship has a down indicator on the press box side, but not a line to gain indicator on the press box side, if I'm thinking correctly.
Flip it. They have a line to gain. Well, they have a down indicator, and then they've got the little, that little arrow, the little flag.
Oh, so they've got the arrow, but they don't have chains on that side.
No chains. So
that's what
the poor guy that has to set up shop and then run back, so he gets his steps in that day.
That's right. Okay. So that's, again, chains. They're near and dear to Michael and I's heart. We are the arbiters there until it's close, and then the referee has to come in and do it because we don't have that authority. But we can sure give a lot of indications and a lot of guidance to him as well in that process. So that's chains. Michael, why don't we talk about the game clock?
Sure. So again, hopefully, again, the fields you're working have game clocks and play clocks on the field. I think, luckily in Indiana, just about every field that I've worked has had a game clock, and I think nearly all of them had a play clock. And if you're really lucky, a lot of schools have the kind of smaller, they've got a big scoreboard, but then on each end zone they have a game clock with a play clock right above it, and that's big time. That makes you feel special, so I always love those locations. But that's something that you want to make sure, if you usually are back judge, and I think most crews is the back judge, is meeting with your timing personnel, part of your pregame. Primary responsibility is the back judge there for play clock. We talked about that, so make sure you know where those are. If there's been any issues with those, hopefully your clock folks tell you that. If worst case scenario, you have to keep it on the field. I had a game this year where our game clock and play clock went out, so we got to keep track of both, and that was fun. But those are things that you just want to prepare for. Otherwise, I think that covers just about all of high school. Ryan, do we want to move into college?
Yeah, why don't we get there? And as we alluded to earlier, it's Rule 1 in high school, it's Rule 1 in college. So talking about the field, nothing really different here. As everybody knows, the field, it's the same size in high school as it is in college. Nothing fancy there. We have the 24-inch short yard line extensions, 4 inches inside the sidelines and at the hashes. In college, it's mandatory. So a little bit different from high school. There's going to be fields you go to in high school where they're not there. It's mandatory in college, and I can't recall ever going to a field that didn't have it. Again, you're going to have the solid white area between the sideline and the coaching box. That's where we as wings, that's where we work. That's our area. That's the same in high school as it is in college. Nobody else gets in there. Mm-hmm. You can have contrasting decorations in the end zones, but if they're white, it shouldn't be any closer than 4 feet to either the end line or the sideline there. But a different color can be up against any of those lines. that's the, I guess, the 100-foot overview of the field. Do you want to talk about markings, Michael?
Sure. Very similar to high school. You can have contrasting markings all across the field. Well, not just anything, I guess I should say. But you can have your conference logo, the NCAA logo. A school logo can be on their team, anything like that. That's all fine. And again, this is all part of the pregame. So I know it's Rule 1 is not fun, but it's your game management rule. And it helps you when it comes to how do we handle this situation? How do we prepare for this? How do we pregame this? So,
well, and the other thing.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, Michael.
No, go ahead.
But you made a good point that this is pregame, right? So, if a coach or a player comes and asks you a question about either field measurements, marking, something like that, or last week we talked about player equipment. We might be talking about field equipment today. This is your chance to make a first impression, right? So if you get asked what should be a fairly obvious question to an official, and you've got the answer there, you're getting off on the right foot. If you're struggling through that, it's not the greatest start for you. So again, this is an important rule.
And just like we referenced earlier in the high school rule book, just like in the college rule book, the rules here, read through it, but again, it's about game management. And again, if you're at a site and the field, I don't know, it's not 2 yards for your white stripe, or maybe the line's crooked. I know a lot of colleges are going to the turf, and again, don't take that for granted, but this isn't the time to say, hey coach, you don't have a clearly visible 50-yard line running through your logo, just like we talked about. That's not going to win you any points, and it's not going to make your afternoon very easy.
Right.
Similar to high school, we have the 9-yard marks that we talk about, and again, that's something I struggled with when I first started was, what's this 9-yard mark everybody keeps talking about? It just confused the heck out of me. And I think we take it for granted because a lot of schools have numbers, right? They're indicating with a 45 to 35, whatever the case is, and you never really see a 9-yard mark and what that means. And Ryan alluded to it earlier, the rule regarding substitutions, that 9-yard mark comes into play, right? So we have to know where that is. And I think
it also, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, it also comes into play when we're thinking through intentional grounding, because that 9-yard distance, when we try to think of how close does a player have to be to the ball, if the quarterback's stationary versus on the run, if the receiver's stationary versus moving, and we try to think through what's the distance and do I have a player in the area, that 9-yard mark, it's the one sort of visual measurement that we have on the sideline. So
that's a great point.
It's useful in it's part of the substitution rule. Absolutely, you can't hide that. There's no lonesome end plays anymore or anything like that with the guy hiding on the sideline. But it's also useful it's our one unit of measurement on the field that we can then apply for intentional grounding as well.
Absolutely, that's a great point. So I've never thought of that. Look at that, I learned something today. So I'll start to use that in my repertoire.
Well, I learned this from a Zoom last year with a Big Ten official saying it, and I can guarantee I'd never thought about that until I heard him say it. So it's not something that I can take credit for myself by any means.
I think I'll speak for myself. A lot of the things that you hear me say, I wish I could say I invented them. I wish I could take credit for them.
Yeah.
Like Ryan talked about, we've heard this from other folks, and it's really just stuff that we want to share with you all to help your career as you're getting started, or maybe you're in the early phases like Ryan and I are, but just things that we can all get better at working about. So that's just like high school. The college line's very similar in both realms. Ryan, what about the team box?
Yeah, again, college has changed a little bit. We alluded that high school, and it was I think it was a little bit different from state to state during the 2020 season. So in Indiana, we had extended the team boxes. Was it 15 to 15 for high school? I think it was 15 to 15.
Something like that.
Regardless, that's gone. So in high school here in Indiana this season, it was back to 25 to 25. College has stuck with a 20 to 20 yard line team box. So a lot of fields are still marked for the 25 to 25, but if you're asked about it, they can be within the 20s. They can't be outside of the 20s, but the teams can be within the 20s. That's for the exclusive use of substitutes, trainers, and other people affiliated with the team. So remember, the officials have 6 feet on the sideline. That hopefully it's a solid white 2 yards, but the officials get 2 yards. Coaches behind them have 6 feet, so 2 yards from them, and then the players are going to be behind the coaches. In college, there's restrictions on the number of people who can be in that area, team box area. You can have basically an unlimited number of actual squad players in full uniform, and a maximum of 50 other people who are directly involved in the game. They have to have credentials that are numbered 1 through 50, and there's no other credentials beyond that. Now, medical personnel very reasonably are exempted from this, and they have their own pass there. Again, officials are allowed in the white. Coaches are permitted in the coaching box, which is that area between the white and the players area. There's no journalist, anything like that, inside of the team area of the coaching box while the game's going on. However, if anything like that is happening, we do not kick people out. It's game management personnel who are responsible for that. So if you have an issue, and this is true for college or high school really, get game management involved. There's also rules for in college in terms of practice kicking nets. We'll see those in high school as well, but college is more explicit there. Those have to be inside of the team area, but if the stadium just doesn't permit enough room for that, then they can be outside of that as well. Michael, I had, sorry, were you going to go?
I was going to say, I wish that I could say that I've been a part of a game where I had to worry about 50 non-uniform people.
We're all working to the point to where we can have those games where you have to check for those credentials. Not there yet, but that's what we're working hard for. Michael, you did such a good job with the goalposts and the pylons for high school. Why don't you talk about those for college as well?
Well, the good news is they're the same. It's the same orange pylon you're going to see. It's going to go in the same spot, sideline, goal line, and again, that's what we talked about. That's part of your pregame. So, luckily, Ryan and I both being short wings in high school, and on Saturdays I'm a deep wing, but I'm still on the sideline. And then Ryan is a short wing as well on Saturdays as well. We're still used to the sideline. We're still used to that area, and my pregame doesn't change a whole lot, Ryan. I don't know about yours, but I'm still at least walking the field. I'm definitely going down the sidelines, if not both sides, because I want to be aware if there's any tricky spots. Maybe the field dips somewhere. Maybe there's a water spigot. You just got to know where these things are. And I think you had a sand trap once that you had to evade. Is that right?
Yeah, I had one last year where one of the back corners of the end zone had... it was interesting. I think that the long jump pit was near there, but it wasn't a sand trap there. It was just this weird plastic on the field. In high school, I had a sand trap recently.
That might be what it is.
I hate to digress, but thinking through a game that Michael and I had last year. So we're talking about, again, what the ideal conditions are. And obviously, you're not going to cancel a game because a line might be painted incorrectly, or that logo in the middle of the field might be obscuring the 50-yard line. You're not canceling that game. However, if there's an issue with the field and player safety is involved, that's where the antennas start going up there, right? So in a past episode, when we had Rick Frank on, I disclosed that in my real life, I'm a lawyer. So I try not to bring that up too much. I don't volunteer that information, but I'm more acutely aware of like dangers, I think probably because of that. I just because of what I do for a living, I have this eye that makes me look out for potential hazards and dangers, maybe more than a rational person would. But when we go out to a field and we see something, then we're going to do something, right? So last year we had a field where there was a sand pit, long jump pit, I think, that was very close to the side of the end zone. And just because the ground had settled or whatnot, one of the edges, which was like a 2x4, it was sticking up a few inches. And it's something that reasonably, if a receiver is diving for a catch or something, you could very easily see somebody breaking their arm or getting injured falling onto that, right? Yep. So now, it wasn't like we saw it and said, okay, we're canceling this game. We went to the AD, went to game personnel, and we found some padding to put over it. Problem solved, play ball. It wasn't an issue at all that night. I don't think it sounded like it wasn't something that had been mentioned to them very much before, but it was a hazard. It was it was too close, right? it was obvious that it could affect a player. I can think of one maybe 4 to 5 years ago where very close to the back of the end zone was, and I was not a track and field person, so there's probably a term for it, and write in and tell me what it is, because I'm going to screw this up. But whatever the circle is that the discus throwers or the shot put guys started, the circle, right? Is it just the circle, or is there?
I don't know. We're going to call it the circle. Let us know.
So that circle, it tends to have a boundary of a piece of metal that sticks up, I don't know, inch, 2 inches. And again, tell me if it's an inch and a half, write in and tell me what it is. But there was this metal thing sticking up above the ground, just beyond the back of the end zone, and it looked dangerous. We didn't cancel it. Fortunately, the school, they had left their blocking sleds and tires and such out there. So 2 or 3 officials, we got together and we just moved tires in front of it. So it was just rubber. If they dove for it, they're going to land on rubber, right? So problem solved. I can think of a game you and I had, Michael, where the team had left the blocking sled. I think it was actually in the white at the back of the end zone.
I remember this.
So it's a little close. So what do? We went back to our high school days and we moved the blocking sled.
We sure did. Sure did.
So again, we're trying to talk about ideal situations here. The rule book gives you the ideal situation. Make it work. The only thing I can think of where I would say we're not playing is if you had, say, a grass field and the sprinkler system was broken and they were all sticking up in the field, right? So you've got these like tripping and hazards that could, I don't know, puncture somebody who falls on it or something there. That might be the type of situation where I might have to say, I don't know. Right.
And I think if you had a situation like that, and we've kind of derailed here, but goal line pylons is where we started with this somehow. But they're orange, they're 4x4, they're 18 inches, and make sure the goalposts are padded. All right, that's very similar. But I think, like Ryan talked about, if you had a situation like that, game management is going to be aware of it, and likely, on a Friday or even on a Saturday, you're going to know ahead of time. You might be driving out to your site, and AD might be calling the crew chief saying, "Hey, we've got an issue. Our sprinkler system broke. The field's flooded. We're going to try to move the game." Maybe they end up postponing to the next day or something like that. But those catastrophic events,
right,
you're going to know ahead of time, and there's going to be a plan in place, and it's not going to fall on your shoulders. So,
right.
The thing that we want to stress is once the game is turned over to us, as we take out to the field, when we're in charge, we have to make sure the playing area is safe. Prior to that, it is up to game management. So.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's our job to make it work, right? We can involve game management in doing that, but once we get there, there's going to be a football game played, barring weather or something else that's just out of our hands. We're going to make it work, and that's the lesson. Hopefully, that you take away from this particular episode is make it work. But again, that was a massive aside there from me. So again, I apologize, Michael.
Heck of a rabbit hole. I asked the question. So
I just wanted to make sure that we didn't leave this episode without noting that there are areas where you have to step in. I'm not going. As you said earlier, we're not going to ask the AD to repaint the field before the game. But if there's something that looks dangerous, let's find some way to cover it up or to pad it so that we don't have a problem. Easy enough, move on, play ball. Yep. And you talked about goalpost and pylons. So remember, both levels, the crossbar is 10 feet above the ground. In high school, the uprights are 23 feet 4 inches. In college, they're 30 feet. So other than that, all the same. Check the padding, make sure it's all there.
Yep.
So I mentioned this earlier, and I'm not going to go too much in depth here. Again, the NFHS rules allow either the traditional chains that we think of or some other 10-yard marker. In college, they're yardage chains, so it's what we traditionally think of and what you see all the time. The 2 sticks at the end, as well as the down box. Michael does this in high school, and we do it in college as well. We try to get those guys 6 feet back. So at the back of our safe area on the sideline, that's where we want them to operate as well. There can be, Michael alluded to this earlier, we were talking about the high school state championships here. In college, you can use those non-slip line to gain ground markers off the sidelines. They're recommended for both sides of the field. I don't often see those, frankly, at our games, but they can be there as well. You can't have advertising on the down box or the line to gate indicator, but you can have a manufacturer's logo, a school logo, a conference logo, and sometimes for bowl games you do see some advertising for the sponsor, usually on the circle on the top of the sticks. But for all practical purposes, for the chains, there is not really a material difference that you're ever going to notice between high school and college there.
Yep.
So that's chains in a nutshell. We talked a little bit earlier about hazards and obstructions, and Michael's going to cover those for us here too.
So we talked about hazards and obstructions earlier, and when we say playing enclosure, we're talking about that area, not just the field itself, but around the field. So Ryan had a good example with the track situation he was talking about with that bumper there. We want to make sure that everybody is safe, and that's the thing we're talking about. So we alluded to the play clock as well earlier. That a lot of times is a couple of feet off the end line. We want to make sure that's padded too, just like we would for the goal post, and protect everybody. So if we do have an issue or anything like that, the referee right away get to game management and notify them, and then come up with a plan in place to take care of that.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Michael. But in order for us to get game management involved, as you alluded to earlier, I don't think you alluded. I think you more said it. As you directly stated earlier, this is something that we have to be looking for in our pregame walkthroughs, right? Pregame is not a time for us to just go around and stare and enjoy the outdoors. There's a reason for us to be out there. We're checking the measurements, we're checking the marks, but we're also looking for safety issues. If there's something that needs to be corrected, that's the time to get it done, right? We don't want to delay the game when there's something that we can fix pregame. Simple enough there.
The only thing I'd add to that too, Ryan, is on Friday nights we have 5 guys, and on Saturdays we have 7. So, there's ample opportunity, especially when you have, 5 or 7. Find something to do. The worst thing I think you can do is go stand at the 50 and just stare up at the sky. So, we can check player uniforms, we can check boundaries, we can check enclosures, and that's the important thing, to have time to do that.
Well, and in college as well. So in high school, we're typically going out to the field 45 minutes before the kick. In college, we have to have 3 officials out there 90 minutes before the kick.
Right.
So when you're out there 90 minutes before the kick, there's a lot of time to be looking at measurements, to be looking at things that look like they might be a little bit off somewhere, and going through there. The ball, we talked about the ball already. Again, you know what a football looks like. They're gonna be inspected. The back judge in college is going to be the one who measures them, pumps them up to the right level. That's always seemed like a lot of work to me, and God bless the back judges who do that, because it just seems very tedious, and I've got enough other things to do. I'm not going to worry about that myself. But as we said earlier, one other difference between high school and college: in high school, they can have 8 or 12 laces. In college, it's one set of 8 equally spaced lacings. So there's your difference. You can have the white stripes, but those are only going to be on 2 panels adjacent to the laces. So, if we think through the different appearance of an NFL ball versus a college ball versus a high school ball, that's one of those things there. The weight's 14 to 15 ounces here. Pressure, like high school, is 12.5 to 13.5 pounds per square inch. Again, that back judge is going to have a pump and a gauge, so not going to be terribly difficult to figure that out. Advertising is prohibited except for the name of the manufacturer, the school logo, a conference or an NCAA logo, an AFCA logo, or a college football playoff logo. Michael, you talked about this a little bit earlier, but college is very specific in terms of the number of balls and the way that's all checked in. So why don't you go through that here?
Yeah, in this case, the rule specifies 10 balls. So if they come in with 8 or 6, that's fine. If they come in with 20, then they need to pick their best 10. So I don't know that I had too many. I think we had a rainy game this past season, so we might have had 6 or something like that. But a lot of times teams have 4 or 5.
Yeah, they can go over if it's rainy or something, but usually 10 is enough.
Yeah, if it's a downpour and it's cats and dogs, then they want to bring out 15. I guess they can.
Right.
Yeah. So anyway, Ryan talked about that earlier, making sure that they're checked in, and the other thing is the back judge marking them. I know on my crew, my back judge always has an H and a V for home balls and away balls, and again, that's something I want to continue to work on this year, making sure I'm getting the right ball. The ball mechanics in college are a little bit different. We have both teams on each sideline in terms of balls, and making sure we're getting the right one in there, I think, is obviously important because teams want to play with the ball that they brought. So it's worth it to take that extra second to grab that ball, take a look at it, you got the right ball, in we go.
Right. And one other thing I'll add on balls is that the rule book says that the home team is to provide legal balls. So I guess in theory, the visiting team could use the home team's footballs, but in practice, not something you're going to have to worry about. Everybody has their own footballs. Nobody trusts anybody else. So not going to be a problem there. Ultimately, the referee or the umpire determines whether a ball is legal. In terms of measuring a football, it's usually something that by feel or by eye, those guys can figure out. If it has to be measured, then that has to be done after it's inflated, and then the measurements take place there. There is a penalty in college if you mark a football to indicate a preference for any player or situation. That's prohibited. It's a live ball foul, and it's 15 yards from the previous spot. I have never seen that, but it is in the rule book, so in theory, that could come up. Have you come across that, Michael?
I haven't. And I will say this, I mean, maybe in week 1, I guess you might notice it, but when you get to week 8, 9, or 10, and the last week back judge marked them, and this week my back judge is marking them, and it's been used in practice, and it's a little beat up, I don't know that I'm going to notice it. So, but it's good to know. It's in the rules, so it's important.
Yeah, it's a good thing to keep in mind. Again, that's one of those, keep it in your back pocket should it ever come up. But for all intents and purposes, you shouldn't be out there necessarily looking for that one because I just don't think it comes up all that often.
I probably wouldn't bring it up unless it looks like a piñata or something like that. I probably would leave that one alone.
Speaking of leaving it alone, we're going to leave you alone at this point. And we've come to the end of our episode, and we'd like to thank you for joining us once again for another episode of Learn Your Stripes. Now that we're back on schedule, we're going to leave you with a play to consider.
Sure. A's ball, 2nd and 7 at the B34. A28 takes a handoff and runs around the left side. B27 tackles A28 at the B30, and the ball comes loose. B34 clearly recovers the ball. Now, in high school, L rules that A28 was down before the ball came loose. U and B conference with L and R and insist the ball came out prior to A's knee touching the ground. What's the result? Now, for the college scenario, the ruling on the field is that A28 was down before the ball came loose. The instant replay gets involved, and the video clearly shows the ball was loose before A28's knee touched the ground. It shows a clear recovery by B34, and that 3:30 remained in the first quarter when the ball was recovered. What's the result in this case? So, take a look at that. Think about it. Who's going to be next to put the ball in play at both levels? What's the play clock going to be? What's the status of our game clock? And what will be the down and distance?
We'll discuss that play at the start of the next episode. In the meantime, if you want to let us know what your ruling would be, or if you have any questions or feel we made a mistake, please email us at learnyourstripes@gmail.com. You can find us on your app of choice, or you can obtain episodes or an RSS link to directly download all episodes into your podcast app of choice at learnyourstripespodcast.com. Please also follow us on Facebook at Learn Your Stripes Podcast, on Instagram at the same name, and on Twitter at LYS_podcast. If you enjoy the podcast, please tell your friends and rate us 5 stars and leave a review on your app of choice. We'll see you back here in 2 weeks. In the meantime, keep learning your stripes.
Thank you, everyone.